Hey, everybody, ready for a deep dive into a story that's got everything you could want? Poverty, passion, and a whole lot of rock and roll.
Sounds exciting.
Today, we're going way back to the beginning, exploring the early years of Elvis Presley.
Before he was the king.
Exactly.
Huh.
Before the whole world knew him as the king.
Mm-hmm.
We've got chapter 1 of his biography right here.
Oh, cool.
And trust me, you might be surprised by what we find. For starters, Elvis wasn't an only child.
Oh, is that right?
He had a twin brother.
Wow, that's something I didn't know. It's true, and it's a detail you really have to think about right from the start. Elvis's twin, Jesse Garin, was stillborn.
Right.
Can you imagine the impact that loss must have had on his parents, Vernon and Gladys?
Oh, absolutely.
It really sets a sad tone for his early life.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how losing his twins so early on might have shaped Elvis's personality
Yeah.
and his relationship with his parents, especially his mother, Gladys. Their bond was incredibly strong, right?
You can really see that in how Gladys doted on Elvis, almost as if she had to pour all her love into the son who survived.
Right.
And of course, we can't forget about their poverty. They were really struggling financially. Elvis was born in 1935 during the Great Depression.
Right in the middle of it.
And his first home was a 2-room house with no plumbing or electricity.
Wow.
It's a huge contrast to the life he would eventually have.
That's crazy to think about, this global icon starting out in those circumstances.
I know, right?
It really shows you how much drive and ambition he must have.
Yeah.
But tell me more about Tupelo. What was it like? How did it influence young Elvis?
Tupelo was a small town in Mississippi. It was full of these musical traditions that would become so important to Elvis's sound.
Oh, interesting.
Gospel music was everywhere, especially at the First Assembly of God Church.
The Presley's church.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
That's where Elvis was exposed to those powerful gospel singers. That call and response and the emotional way they sang, it all became so characteristic of Elvis's style later on.
So we can really trace those powerful vocals and his incredible connection with the audience back to gospel.
You got it.
Wow.
But it wasn't only gospel. Elvis was also exposed to the blues in Tupelo.
Oh, really?
He would sneak off to the Shake Rag district.
What's that?
It was historically a black neighborhood, and he'd listen to the blues musicians playing on the street.
Oh, wow.
You can definitely hear that blues influence in how emotional his music is.
Yeah.
All that longing and heartbreak.
It's like Elvis was taking all these different types of music and combining them to make something totally new.
He really was. And don't forget about country music.
Oh, right, of course.
The Presleys always had country music playing on the radio at home. Elvis grew up on those stories and melodies and that classic country twang.
Yeah.
It all added to the mix of influences that shaped his unique style.
It's amazing to see how this one little town played such a big role in shaping Elvis.
It really is.
It shows you how much our early environment can affect us. And speaking of early influences, how about that story of Elvis's first performance? 10-year-old Elvis singing Old Shep at a local fair. What do you think about that?
It might seem like a small thing, but it's really important. Not just because it was his first time performing for people,
Right.
but also think about the song he chose.
Okay.
Old Shep is a really sad, classic country song. For Elvis to connect with all that emotion at such a young age,
Yeah.
it shows that he had this sensitivity and empathy that would later really connect with his fans.
That's a great point. It wasn't just about hitting the notes.
No.
It was about making people feel something.
Exactly.
It's funny to think about how we only won 5th place.
Yeah,
Not exactly a huge win,
not exactly.
but maybe it planted a seed.
And
Maybe it gave him just a little taste of the spotlight and made him want to perform on an even bigger stage.
Could be. But life in Tupelo wasn't always happy and full of music. When Elvis was in 3rd grade, his father, Vernon, went to prison.
Oh, wow.
He was convicted of check forgery.
Oh, no.
Imagine what that must have been like for young Elvis.
I can't even imagine. All that shame and the money problems.
Yeah.
Maybe even being afraid of authority figures after that. It must have really affected him.
And it makes you wonder if that's part of why he was so generous later on.
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Almost like he had to give back and help others. Maybe he wanted to stop other people from suffering like his family did.
That's a really interesting connection.
Yeah.
It adds another layer to Elvis's story. So we've got this mix of influences, gospel blues, country family dynamics, and even some real hardship.
Yeah.
And then in 1948, when Elvis was 13, the family moves to
Memphis. That's where everything really starts.
Yeah.
Yeah, Memphis. It was a whole new world for Elvis, especially as a teenager. This wasn't some small town anymore.
Wait, this is a big city.
Exactly. A real melting pot of cultures and music, and it was all about to change thanks to rock and roll and Elvis, of course.
So we've got Elvis shaped by everything that happened in Tupelo. He's stepping into Memphis, a city with so much possibility. It really does sound like the perfect recipe for something big.
What was the music scene in Memphis like back then?
Just picture Beale Street, the heart of Memphis music.
Blues clubs everywhere, just full of this raw energy. You had legends like B.B. King and Howlin' Wolf playing to huge crowds.
Wow.
Elvis would just stand outside these clubs and listen.
Really?
Completely mesmerized. He was taking it all in. The music, the way they performed on stage, the power of it all.
That's amazing. The future king of rock and roll getting an education on Beale Street.
I know. It's pretty cool. It makes you think, how did Memphis change him? Did it make his musical style better?
Yeah. Or did it inspire the way he performed?
It was both. Remember how he had all those influences from Tupelo, gospel blues country?
Yeah.
Memphis really pushed him to put those styles together in new ways. All those live shows he saw on Beale Street made him want to connect with an audience in a really powerful way.
Right.
He started experimenting and finding his own voice within all that exciting music that was around him. But he was still just a teenager. How did he go from being a small-town kid to a city musician? Especially when rock and roll wasn't really accepted back then.
That's a good point. It must have been hard.
He didn't fit in right away. Not at Hume's high school.
His high school.
Yeah, imagine this shy kid from Mississippi suddenly surrounded by all these city kids.
Oh, yeah.
He dressed differently. His musical tastes were different. He even started growing his hair long.
Which wasn't common back then.
Not at all. It was pretty unusual. It sounds like that's when he started to develop that iconic Elvis style.
Do you think so?
I do. That would become so connected to rebellion and young people.
Right. It's interesting how rock and roll was seen as controversial back then.
It really was. Some people thought it was dangerous even, like it was a threat to society. How did Elvis deal with that, coming from a more conservative background?
Good question. You have to remember what was going on back then. The world was still recovering from World War II.
Yeah.
Everyone wanted stability.
Yeah.
Things to be normal.
Right.
And rock and roll was so different with its rhythms and passionate singing.
It was a big change, and older people saw that as a problem.
I bet.
Some even called it the devil's music.
Wow. That's crazy to think about now when rock and roll is so normal.
I know. It shows how brave Elvis was to embrace this new music.
He was definitely going against what people expected, challenging the way things were.
He was a rebel, but it wasn't just to cause trouble. His love for the music was real. He really felt it, and people saw that.
So it was about more than just the music. It was about the way he performed, too. His moves, his whole personality.
Definitely. He had that raw energy and charisma. You couldn't ignore him. But remember, he was also really dedicated to his music.
Oh, yeah.
Always practicing, getting better. He wasn't scared to try new things, to push boundaries. He was inspired by everyone, from the blues musicians on Beale Street to the gospel singers in church.
It sounds like everything came together at the right time. His talent, the different music he loved, his willingness to be, and even the culture at the time.
It's like all these pieces coming together. Do you think Elvis could have become Elvis anywhere else? Or did he need Memphis?
That is a good question. It makes you think. Yeah, it makes you realize that being in the right place at the right time can really change your life.
Right.
But it's not all luck, is it? Elvis really wanted to make something of himself.
And that's what's so important. Talent isn't enough. You have to work at it, keep going, and be okay with taking chances. Elvis wasn't afraid to be different, to challenge the rules. He really pushed himself, and that's how you grow.
It's really inspiring. It reminds you that you don't have to come from money or know everything to do great things. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to be yourself, to embrace what makes you unique.
Exactly. And think about how Elvis's background helped him connect with people. He knew what it was like to be poor, to struggle. People could feel that in his music and the way he performed. They saw themselves in him.
He was like the boy next door who became this huge superstar, but he never forgot where he came from.
Right, and people love that. It's why he's still so popular, even though he's been gone for so long.
It's like he was able to connect with something deep inside people that need to connect with each other, to express themselves, to break free.
He really did. So as we finish up this deep dive into Elvis's early years, what's the one thing that sticks out to you?
What's the most important thing?
For me, it's how powerful those early influences are. The places we grow up, the music, we hear the people around us, the tough times we go through, they all make us who we are.
Yeah, and sometimes those hard times even make us stronger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Elvis didn't just survive those hard times. He used them to make something beautiful, something that moved people.
It's like he took the pieces of his life and made art out of them. That's something we can all learn from. We all have our own story to tell our own point of view. It's about finding our voice and being brave enough to use it.
And maybe we can inspire other people along the way. So think about it. What are the things that made you who you are? What experiences made you passionate about things? What made you who you are? What gave you the strength to deal with life's challenges?
Explore those early influences. You might be surprised by what you learned about yourself.
You might figure out how you got to where you are today.
And if you're feeling like you want to change things up a bit, put on some Elvis. Turn it up and let loose. You never know, you might find your own inner king. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep on rockin'.